As keynote speaker, I shall provoke debates and allow the discussants to figure out the answers and the way forward. And I do not plan to take much of your time about definitions of the terms, but maybe I will simply mention the key words in the theme, in the topic I am to present. One, imperative. Imperative simply in this context means compelling, necessary, needful. Politics in this context will refer to a framework for making policies for the governance of a social entity. The framework includes the totality of institutions, rules, and processes through which a country is governed. Nigeria, of course, will mean a sovereign geopolitical entity called Nigeria. Some will call it a country, some will call it a nation, but we will see the difference as we go down. Stable or stability means steady, means progressive, consistent, and so on. Again, for further clarification, I need to explain the difference between a country and a nation, and possibly a nation state. A country refers to a sovereign geopolitical entity with its own government and boundaries. Under international law, a country is also called a state, or referred to as a state. Then a nation refers to a group of people who share common history, common culture or tradition, common language, often common ancestry, and maybe of a definite geographic region, or even spread beyond a particular geographic region. And that is why in Nigeria, though Nigeria is a country, you have many ethnic nationalities in Nigeria. You have the Igbo nation, the Ijaw nation, the Yoruba nation, the Hausa nation, the Fulani nation. So within a country, you have various nationalities. Now, a nation state is a country that has been able to weld into one national aspiration, all the various nationalities that are there in content. So it's not the same that it's not automatic that once you have a country, it becomes a nation. You have to build that country into a nation state. And so nation building starts from the time you formed the country. And I needed to make this clarification so that as I go on, you'll be able to understand the positions I am taking. A nation state refers to countries that are able to successfully create a nation out of its population. So I'm going to contend in this paper that we have formed a country, but we have not been able to build it into a nation state. And I think that is why we have the instability we are talking about today. And I will contend in this paper that the core of our political challenges, or if you like, political instability we have today, is our inability to successfully build or galvanize the various nationalities within Nigeria into one common national consciousness. So this is to say that it is only countries that have successfully midwifed its diverse population into a common national aspiration and interest through systems and structures that engender general sense of belonging, which inspires national consciousness, patriotism, and pride that are qualified to be called a nation. So it's just, you are not automatically a nation because you are a country. I am to say at this juncture that it is simpler to come together to form a country, but to build it into a nation is a much more difficult task. And that is what we are grappling with in Nigeria today, and that is why we have the instability we are talking about. It is only a country that has evolved into a nation that is usually politically stable. So if we are worried about our instability, it's because there is a gap in our nation building process. In our own particular case in Nigeria, there is no gainsaying that we formed a country, but not yet able to build it into a nation. This instability of the inability of our successive leaders to build our country into a nation state is at the core of our political challenges, or if you like, political instability. I shall canvass in this presentation that there are two main factors that have constrained our efforts in nation building. One, fear of domination among the various ethnic groups 2, mutual distrust among the various ethnic groups. This will run through my presentations, these 2 major reasons. These 2 factors makes it impossible to inspire patriotism, without which there cannot be nation building. In other multi-ethnic countries like ours that have made better progress at nation building, these 2 factors had been overcome through systems and institutions of government, among which are democracy, federalism, constitutionalism or rule of law, leadership, which I can call an intangible national asset, but very, very potent. These systems work in different variants in many countries, but nevertheless have yielded great results in most countries. In this presentation, we shall examine the gallant efforts of our founding fathers in deploying these systems and institutions to build a nation state. But why it has not worked in our country shall be the lot of the discussants to explain. I must, however, mention that many believe that leadership is central to our failures, while others hold the view that military incursion into politics truncated the progress being made. In my view, the solution to the challenge of building a nation state lies in the emergence of a skillful, visionary, and sacrificial nation builder as the leader of that country, and his commitment to devising effective strategies to manage the complexities of the country's diversity. When we get there, we'll be stable. Having provided above clarifications, permit me therefore to go into the meat of my presentation, which will include, I will start with the imperatives. What are the reasons why Nigeria must be politically stable? The core of this presentation is to highlight the imperatives of the political stability of Nigeria. I hold that it is not only needful, but it is absolutely necessary for Nigeria's administration to be stable for the following reasons. 1, having formed Nigeria with a defined aspiration, it is imperative to consolidate the country as one indivisible entity and collectively build it to the dream of the founding fathers, i.e., to become a strong, united, and prosperous nation. 2, having formed Nigeria out of a diverse population, it is imperative to strengthen national cohesion among the component units, promote national interest, and de-emphasize ethnic interests. 3, having formed Nigeria as a sovereign political entity, it is imperative to stabilize Nigeria as a democratic nation where peace and justice reign, rule of law is supreme, and power belongs to the people. I need not emphasize that any system or organization that does not promote justice and fairness will neither have peace nor progress. 4, having formed Nigeria based on liberal economic ideology, it is imperative to stabilize Nigeria as a growing national economy where national infrastructure shall support development and entrepreneurship. 5, having formed Nigeria within the precinct of accountable governance, it is imperative to guarantee the welfare and security of lives and property of the citizens. 6, having formed Nigeria with the hope of building it to a nation state, it is imperative that the system, the structure, and the programs of government must engender that sense of belonging that inspires patriotism and national pride. I must add that an unstable polity weakens the authority of government and constrains its ability to guarantee security and development. Political instability, therefore, not only diminishes the essence of nationhood, but also defeats the purpose of government. Finally, having formed Nigeria as a sovereign state, it is imperative that the nation positions and projects itself well enough to earn the respect of the international community. And when you consider these 7 items, you will find out that it is not, there is we have no alternative to making sure that we stabilize Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, you can agree with me that the need for a stable Nigeria is dire and inescapable. We can no longer continue to experiment with the lives and future of our citizens. We can no longer blame the colonial masters after 64 years of independence. We shall not allow the labors of our heroes past to be in vain. And let me assure you, having founded this country as an independent political entity, no foreign power or friend will come here to help us stabilize it or build it to a nation of our dream. The responsibility is ours, and I dare say the burden is on this generation. If I may borrow the words of General Yakubu Gowon, this is a task that must be accomplished. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, let us record the labors of our heroes past, i.e. Habam Macaulay, Chief Ernest Ikoli, Mr. H.O. Davis, and other nationalists who fought for our independence. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Sir Ahmadu Bello, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, who negotiated the Lancaster House Agreement and took up the mantle of leadership to set up the first indigenous government in our country. Dr. Alex Ekweme, Alhaji Abubakar Rimi, Malam Adamu Shiroma, Chief Solomon La, Chief Bola Ige, Professor Jerry Gana, and so on, who restored power from the military. May I crave your indulgence to rise for a 1-minute silence in their honor. To fashion out a stable administration for Nigeria, in this review, we shall see that mutual suspicion among the various nationalities existed from the beginning of the amalgamation, even among the founding fathers. This was not unexpected, given the differences in culture, religion, and language. What is unfortunate, however, is that the intergroup suspicion have morphed into mutual distrust and spite, which instead of abating, have dramatically grown over the years to completely drown our national interest. It is my belief that every other factor that has affected the progress and stability of our country derives from our inability to effectively manage our plural composition and lift national consciousness over and above ethnic interests. It does not require any special wisdom to note that without overcoming mutual suspicion and distrust, we shall remain unable to collectively commit to building one nation for all, where systems, structures, and programs of government engender a general sense of belonging, which in turn inspires national consciousness, patriotism, and pride. I am therefore compelled to state clearly that no nation has progressed on a sprawling foundation of mutual suspicion or crisis of confidence among her component units. The Nigerian journey to nationhood has been one of a struggle to manage our differences under a system that offers confidence and accommodation to all. I therefore consider it needful to provide a few insights on this journey. The presentation hereunder is not about history, but to appreciate our present condition. Therefore, we do need to trace the contending issues in the making of Nigeria and the solutions sought in the time past. So I'll categorize the presentation going forward into two: the issues and the solutions that were presented before independence, then the issues and the solutions that were used to address those issues after independence. So let me start one before independence. Colonial administration never attempted to apply one single administrative system or structure over Nigeria. Before the amalgamation, the North and Southern protectorates were separately administered, and after amalgamation, the system of indirect rule was applied in the North, while direct rule was applied in the South. Even by 1922, when Hugh Clifford's constitution came into being, it created two different legislative and executive councils for South and Northern protectorates, as if the amalgamation has not happened. By these different administrative systems, the colonial masters avoided the challenge of ethnic rivalry, ethnic tension, and contentions. But this was short-lived. short-lived when by 1944, the Richards Constitution created the Central Legislative Council in Lagos to legislate for the whole country. According to Ambassador Jacko in his book, he said, the mostly southern nationalist agitators rejected the Constitution on the ground that the Central Council membership favored the North over the South. They accused the colonial government of seeking to establish a northern hegemony or domination of the country. I must say at this point that this rejection blew open the crisis of confidence and mutual suspicion that trailed from the beginning of effort to form Nigeria as a country. I hope we are following. So importantly, when the two protectorates were administered separately, there was no issue. But immediately Richard Constitution tried to bring everybody together under a legislative system. Then the issue of who is dominating the other now came wide open. Now, when this issue arose, what did the colonial masters do? Look at what they did. Solution. The objection to the composition of the membership of the central legislature and the growing demand by the nationalist agitators that the indigenous people of Nigeria need to be consulted in making any decision concerning the administration of the country led to the first All-Nigerian Constitutional Conference of January 1950 and subsequently gave rise to the Macpherson Constitution. At that conference, which drew participants from across the country, the system and structure of administration acceptable to the three blocks were negotiated and agreed. And the basic feature of that negotiation, which formed the Macpherson Constitution, were three. One, that a democratic system of government patterned after the Westminster Parliamentary Order should be adopted. That a federation of three regional blocks, the North, the East, and the West, should be adopted, and that the regions shall have greater regional autonomy, and so on. So the three blocks agreed that this is the structure of government that can guarantee the progress of the country, and it now formed the 1950 Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, you can agree with me that the three main pillars that formed the foundation of many successful multi-ethnic nations, i.e. democracy, constitutionalism, and federalism, were not lost on our founding fathers. Accordingly, they were adopted at the foundation of Nigeria. So this was the solution which addressed the concern then. Now, the second issue I want to raise is the Kano riot of 1953. So the above resolution of the 1950 conference formed the basis of the 1951 John Macpherson Constitution. As a matter of fact, rather than cure the problems of mutual suspicion, implementation of the Macpherson Constitution generated unimaginable disagreement between the South and the North on the composition of the federal government. While the crisis of confidence was yet to be resolved, Chief Anthony Enahoro of Action Group moved a motion for self-rule by 1956. Immediately, Sir Ahmadu Bello, leader of the NPC, also submitted a counter motion, and submitted a counter motion on the grounds that there were many issues that are yet to be resolved about the union, and so they were not ready. The North was not ready to go for independence. And this was the reason why Nigeria did not get independence by 1956. So with the counter motion by Ahmadu Bello, then they had to go down to resolve the issues before they can make progress. So that disagreement deepened the North-South divide. But even as tension grew, the leadership of the Action Group chose to visit Kano to address their party faithfuls. The supporters of NPC responded with aggressive protest that turned violent and claimed many lives. Following these events, the North issued an 8-point demand as conditions to continue in the Federation. Some of those demands, some of their key demands to remain in the Union were as follows. One, that complete regional legislative and executive autonomy except for defense, external affairs, customs, West African research institutions. 2, no central legislative or executive policy-making body for the whole country. 3, no central agency for all the regions or regional issues, and so on. And what the North is saying is that, look, as it is now, we cannot be part of this Nigeria, except if these demands were addressed. Are you getting me? Yes. As we are following. So, what did the colonial masters do to resolve these issues? Solution. The colonial administration reconvened another conference in London in 1953. It spilled over to 1954. During the conference, far-reaching compromises were made by all sides, and the resolutions at the conference formed the basis of the Littleton Constitution of 1954, which includes the following. It granted real lawmaking powers to the regional legislature, recognized the position of premiers in the regions, recognized Lagos as the federal capital territory, rejected the right of regions to secede as proposed by the action group. It introduced revenue allocation formula based on derivation. So after all this we agreed in the 54 Constitution, then peace again returned. And the two protectorates now, the two regions now agreed that they could move into independence and stay under one country. But that was not all. As it appeared as if the three blocs had agreed, the minority question arose. So the third issue that arose, which I will address, is the minority question. As the nation geared up to independence following the apparent agreement among the three ethnic blocs, agitations by minority tribes across the country for separate regions of their own became too loud to ignore. The minorities feared domination, marginalization, and neglect by the majority blocs if left subsumed within their regions, within the regions they control. So when the colonial administration could not go forward with independence, they now had to address the minority question. What did they do? In response, the colonial administration set up a commission of inquiry headed by Mr. George Harry Willings to look into the affairs of the minority tribes. The commission, which submitted this report in 1957, confirmed that the fears of the minorities were real, but instead of new regions, it recommended the inclusion of fundamental human rights chapter in the Constitution as an adequate safeguard. That was how the fundamental human rights chapter came into our Constitution in the first place. In concluding the history of our bumpy journey before independence, it is important to note from the events preceding independence that there appear not to be any conscious effort by our founding fathers to deny or wish away our ethnic differences. Rather, they devised solutions that should resolve the challenge. I believe they were on the right path and would have made steady progress, but for the unfortunate military interruption. This challenge of mutual suspicion and distrust, driven on the one hand by fear of domination and on the other hand by fear of secession, is still haunting the nation till today. The presumed solutions, that is democracy, federalism, regional autonomy, and so on, appear not to have provided any concrete and lasting antidote to the issues of national incoherence and mutual suspicion. I just raised these three issues before independence and the solutions adopted to resolve them before independence. But I can say that there were a number of other issues, but these were key issues that were resolved centrally at the constitution level. So let us look at eventually when the fears of the minorities were addressed, Nigeria was able to now go for independence in 1960. So after independence, what happened? Did the independence or the agreement to stay together under the solutions earlier provided solve the problem? It appears no. So let's take a quick look before I round up on what has happened since independence. Of course, you know that we achieved independence in 1960, but by 1966, While the young independent nation was still trying to master the art of political administration in a federation haunted by trust deficit and growing mutual suspicion, idealistic young army officers disrupted the civilian administration in a bloody coup d'etat. Again, I agree with Ambassador Jacob, who described the coup in the following words. He said, the fact that the coup happened at all was in itself folly of truly monumental proportion. There was no reason under the sun for that coup to happen. There was no explanation to it. In fact, if you ask me, I will simply say it's just the exuberance of young boys who found themselves in positions having guns. And maybe at that time, across the African continent, the issue of coup was beginning to crop up here and there, and they thought they could experiment that in Nigeria. There was no reason whatsoever. Maybe we would have consolidated our march to nationhood if that coup never happened. Now, so the coup, which was obviously seen from an ethnic prism, was countered, and the ensuing events led to a bloody 30-month civil war that ended with the enthronement of military rule over Nigeria. And you can agree with me that that's where the journey started to go from worse to worse. Now, what did the military do to stabilize the administration of Nigeria? In their own wisdom, in order to preserve the Nigerian Union, the military regime dismantled the regional structures and imposed unitary system of government. Even though they retained the name Federal Republic following the division of the country into 12 states as federating units in 1967, the states become incrementally more appendages of the now super powerful central government. The idea behind the creation of states was largely not only to dismantle the regional autonomies, but to ensure that no region would have the political compactness and economic muscle to break away or declare secession. So in their own wisdom, to have a stronger central government was the only solution that can keep the country together. But you find out that it didn't stabilize the polity. So, but it was a complete revision of what was agreed at the foundation. What the military did was a complete revision of that. So it didn't solve the problem. Even under the military, that means the stability of the country was still very bumpy. So let me also take through quickly further search for solutions by successive military regime. Of course, you know that in 1966, immediately the coup of 66 happened. They empaneled a study group to study the best constitution for Nigeria, But of course, the counter coup did not allow the study group to do much. So they were wiped out. Then eventually, the military dominated till about 1976. At that point, in 1977, a constitution drafting committee under Obasanjo, made up of two persons from each state of the Federation, was set up to recommend appropriate constitution for Nigeria. Of course, you can agree with me that it should be noted that it was this committee that recommended presidential system of government as against Westminster parliamentary system of government. So the report of the committee was submitted to Constituent Assembly. Eventually, a constitutional conference was organized, and the 1979 Constitution was promulgated by the military government of them. But despite this, the 1979 Constitution hardly reduced national tension, and in quick order, President Shagari's government was again overthrown in 1983. But overthrowing the civilian regime again, does it solve the problem? No. But before you know it, General Babangida's coup of 1985 overthrew the General Buhari's coup of 1983. And the General Babangada's regime started another process on stabilizing the polity or fashioning out another administrative program that will stabilize the country. Babangada's regime set up the political bureau to study the best way to stabilize the polity of Nigeria. The political bureau carried out a whole lot of effort, came up with a report, didn't solve any much problem. But one thing that is very important to note about Babangada's regime was that despite the brilliant efforts made, his regime was bogged down by suspicions of coup and counter-coups. And one of the most prominent of the coups that came up then was the Gideon Oka coup. And Gideon Oka coup, okay, let me put it this way. Series of coups attempts dogged Babangada's government. The most notorious being the Major Gideon Oka coup of 1990. It exposed the deep-rooted inter-ethnic distrust in the north, as Major Oka announced the expulsion of the far northern Hausa Fulani-dominated states from the Federation for seeking to dominate the rest of the country. According to Oka, there are Babangida for that. So, in response...